Sultan Sulayman the Magnificent was undoubtedly the greatest ruler of his time, a great and significant name in our Islamic world. If we're talking about Sulayman's greatness, his wars will come last. Europeans used to ask, "Hey guys, is the Sultan coming with a campaign or not? If he's coming, we're doomed." He died hours before the fortress was to be opened. If we had opened it, what would have happened to us? This means the ease with which Europe could have entered Islam. We don't have many suspicions here. We only have a couple of minor issues. This is based on the assumption that what we've already discussed weren't suspicions. I mean, someone who's going to attack us is a womanizer. I apologize for the expression, but his extramarital affairs, the issue of his wife, are what we'll discuss. The Europeans spread the rumor about him. They said, let's tarnish their image and reputation. The ideal for Europeans is a man who is married to one wife and is faithful to her. But someone like Sultan Sulayman the Magnificent, is it conceivable that his wives and those around him could influence the decisions of a leader? Yes, it's conceivable, very conceivable. We're both married and know how women can influence. Nobody acts like they're so tough and unaffected anymore. Honestly, we care about you, but laughs, we're just trying to explain how life works to you. But honestly, Professor Muhammad, I don't understand how Turkish dramas dared to make this series, The Magnificent Century, and distort his reputation and image. They seem to like the Turks, and the way Ottoman history is interpreted within the Turkish context is still poor. And look, this series convinced many people, especially those unfamiliar with history, because the Arab channels that dubbed The Magnificent Century also stopped broadcasting series with a spirit of jihad like Ertugrul and Osman. So, the story about him killing his son Mustafa, yes, Ottoman historians recounted it. How could he do something like that? He was a street-smart man, a leader, after all. That's what I'm trying to say. It's hard to imagine he was naive or deceived. For those who aren't paying attention, we can't justify it. I'm not justifying this. If it's true, it's a mistake that adds to the bad deeds of Sulayman the Magnificent. We don't know all the details. So, to complicate things further, you complicate things and they insult us. No, 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 God forbid. Laughter. Peace be upon you, my brothers, wherever you are. Welcome to a new episode of the 100 Questions in History series. This is the series through which we always answer the pressing questions that arise concerning our great and vast Islamic history, a history we are always proud of. Therefore, we have dedicated this series to our Islamic history, which we must learn in minute detail so that we may learn how they did so that we may do the same. Because if we don't know where we came from, we won't know where we are going. For those who have recently joined us, we have reached the 8th topic, the Ottoman Empire, specifically episode 48. So, if you joined us today, you are required to watch 47 episodes. And if you joined us today, you are required to listen to the answers to the previous 77 questions. Yes, but God willing, you will benefit greatly from everything you see. You must share it with your friends and family. Welcome to everyone, always and forever. It's not right, it's not pleasant, it's not beneficial. We can't start the episode without welcoming our regular guest, Professor Muhammad Al-Harmi. Welcome, Professor Muhammad. May God bless you, Abu Al-Harith. Professor Muhammad, we've reached question 78. Ready? We put our trust in God. Question 78 concerns a great name, an important name, a significant name in our Islamic world, Sultan Sulayman the Magnificent. Professor Muhammad, Sultan Sulayman the Magnificent is the pinnacle of the Ottoman state. Therefore, since we are learning about the history of our master in this series, we also want to know why he was called the Lordiver. Yes, because his father was Selim I, so he is originally Sulayman bin Selim. So why Sulayman the Lordiver? Yes, why did this great sultan try to codify Sharia? What kind of mistake was this? Is it reasonable to abandon Sharia and create laws? So, when he made a law, Professor Muhammad, did he succeed or not? And was there a negative? Muhammad, I mean this great interest this is also a question that might cross someone's mind. And if we had conquered Vienna, what might have changed for us in the course of history? And I promised you that every question has some doubts. Here we don't have many doubts about us, just a couple of minor things. This is based on the assumption that what came before wasn't doubts. Oh, laughs. No, what came before was a question. I asked this question. These doubts aren't mine, I swear. I'm not the one asking. The one asking is our brother who's been with us from the beginning of the series. I mean, he's the one telling you, not me. What am I telling you? I'm telling you why are you all so worked up and talking about Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent? We know there was a series about him called Sultan of the Harem or the Sultan's Harem. The Sultan was a womanizer, extravagant and wasteful and all that. So it's a doubt. We need to see if he was like that or not. I mean, someone is going to open up to us. He's one of our women, I'm sorry for the word. Okay, any suspicion that he also had a wife, who is Hurrem? Yes, or Hurrem. Her name is Hurrem, and that she was the reason for changing the system of succession, the succession to the throne, and influenced him to the point that he killed his son Mustafa. Yes, that's a crime, and this was at her instigation. So these are the two suspicions, but after you tell us about who Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent was, tell us his story. All this nice talk, we come to the suspicion. Question 78. Professor Muhammad, rely on God. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, and praise be to God, and prayers and peace be upon the messenger of God, and upon his family and companions, and those who follow him. Suleiman the Magnificent, we can say he was the last peak in Islamic history. And after Suleiman the Magnificent, the decline began, even if it was a slow decline. But we can say that the moment of Suleiman the Magnificent was their last peak in the history of Muslims, and after him, Muslims began to descend from this peak. Is it true that Suleiman the Magnificent, or the Ottoman state after Suleiman the Magnificent, the expansion means there were expansions? The greatest extent of the Ottoman Empire was during the reign of his grandson, Murad Roman III. Yes, his grandson Murad, who was the son of Selim. He had a son named Selim, who would become Selim Roman II. So, in the history of the Ottoman Empire, Murad's son, Murad, was the last. This is the greatest extent to which the Ottoman Empire expanded. Yes, but if you're talking about the peak, then it was the peak in everything, the peak in civilization, in science, in power, in prestige, in diplomacy. Therefore, I don't remember the name of the historian who said that if we're talking about Suleiman's greatness, his wars will come last. He believes that Suleiman the Magnificent's civilizational and administrative achievements are far more important than his wars. Wow, what a beautiful expression. Yes, of course, you're talking about Suleiman the Magnificent. This man ruled for 46 years in the Gregorian calendar, 47 and a bit in the Hijri calendar. Yes, he ruled. Yes, he assumed power in 1520 and died 1566. And he was born in 154, 1495, 1494, meaning he assumed power at 16 years old. He assumed power, I mean at 26 years old. He was born in 1496, 1494, while 94, he assumed power in 1520 and 20. Okay, fine. So these 46 years there is a Turkish historian named Yilmazun who, according to the periods Suleiman the Magnificent spent in jihad, meaning on horseback, it was 10 years, 7 months, and 7 days. Only 10 years. Oh God. So, these are the periods he spent on horseback, or in his tent, fighting, meaning following up on the matter of jihad. So, you are talking about someone who was extremely active, who had 13 campaigns called the Sultanic campaigns, not counting the armies he sent out, but 13 campaigns in which he personally went out, imperial campaigns they call them imperial campaigns, meaning the sultanic campaigns in which the sultan personally sultan is present, cannot be defeated. Yes, with Osman, what would happen first? Yes, the first defeat, and then the Europeans would discover that a campaign with a sultan could be defeated. A campaign might fail, meaning it might fail to reach its goal, but it would not be defeated. I feel the Europeans were asking, hey guys, is the campaign with the sultan on it or not? If it's with the sultan, we'll be in trouble. It was indeed the campaign of Osman Roman II, the young Osman. When one of the princes wanted to confront it, they told him, are you crazy? This is an imperial campaign, meaning no one can confront it. An imperial campaign consisted of 13 campaigns, 8 in Central Europe, 3 in Iran to confront the Safavid state, 1 in Rhodes in the Mediterranean, and 1 against Italy, and most of these campaigns were unsuccessful. He was in front of him and fortified himself within the fortresses. So, the Safavid state wasn't confronting the Ottoman state, but rather retreating to it to save his army from the Ottoman onslaught. Europeans did the same thing. So, you're talking about a person, and I'm telling you, unlike the armies, which he personally led. Of course, when we talk about an army, Professor Muhammad, we mean soldiers on the right and left wings, and so on, and engineers, yes, and cooks and logistics, and I don't know, and doctors and administrators, and so on. The number of the army exceeds 100,000. Imagine that. What do you have that's like a nation like that, and he's going to fight? So we're talking about the peak of the Ottoman state. We're talking about a sultan, one of the most brilliant sultans in the history of the Ottoman state, indeed, one of the most brilliant sultans in the history of the world. Yes, and from the interesting comparisons, I think Willard Durant in his Story of Civilization said, without a doubt, Suleiman the Magnificent was the greatest and most noble of the Ottoman sultans, and in another place, he says, without a doubt, he was the greatest ruler. His era, the people of his time, of course, the rulers of his era. Those who aren't aware might imagine that the rulers of his era were insignificant people. No, you have, for example, someone like the one I mentioned earlier, named Edward Shepherd Creasy. He has a book called History of the Ottoman Turks, and he focuses on the rulers of Suleiman's time. He says it was a remarkably prolific era in terms of kings, meaning kings and leaders. So when you look at France, you'll find François I, one of the most prominent names in French history. Spain, Charles V, one of the most important rulers in all of European history. Britain, Henry Roman VIII, one of the most important rulers in history. Even the Pope Leo X, one of the most important European popes. Shah Ismail Safavi, founder of the Safavid dynasty. Even in India, Jalaluddin Akbar, one of history's greatest figures. And he says that despite all this prolific period, no one was as adorned with glory as this Ottoman Sultan. That's why we call him the Lawgiver, but Westerners call him Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, or Suleiman the Great, or Suleiman the Great. And even that was in his time, meaning in the Andalusian scholar's journey he used to say that the French called the Ottoman Sultan the Great Master. Yes, you're talking about something enormous, something huge. Or you can imagine that he inherited the Sultanate from his father, and it was 4.5 million square kilometers. Then he made it 19 million and left it at 16 or 17 million square kilometers. What? 3 times as much? Almost 4 times as much. Yes. If my memory serves me right, you're talking about a huge geographical area, a huge area, and yet one of the most important things that distinguished this Sultan was his administrative abilities. Course, let's start with the issue of law. Yes, he is called the lawgiver because he enacted these laws or wrote them. For example, someone like Dr. Ahmed Kanduz, who specializes in Ottoman law, says that most of the Ottoman laws tributed Ottoman laws in 12 volumes. Suleiman alone had 3 volumes of laws, so the entire Ottoman state comprised 3/4 of the laws, and he was responsible for 1/4 of them. He gathered everything that sultans before him had done and added to it, and added to it, and added to it. Of course, that's why he was called the law and the legislator. Some historians say he wasn't called the law because he wrote laws, but because he was keen on justice and on the application of these laws. This gave him, I remember, an Italian historian, an Austrian historian, he was saying that no one could attribute anything to him that would be considered a fault, except his excessive love for his wife, the matter of which we will come to later. Yes, but you can imagine that he was a sultan who had no fault except that he loved his wife excessively. So, such a thing is not considered a problem. And when we come to the subject of Mustafa, we can talk about it. If he was called the law because he enacted the law, meaning he made the law and cared about it, and he collected, cared about, codifying the laws, yes, and detailing and applying them. Okay. What motivated him? Now, what motivated him? Of course, we have already discussed this matter, so I will mention it briefly now. Suleiman's keenness on justice made him pay attention to the issue of the judiciary. Sometimes judges' rulings differ in their same case. His concern for justice motivated him to try to unify the laws or obligate judges to adhere to specific laws. This was to prevent, for example, a judge being corrupt, bribed, or even simply angry. How could the same case or crime be judged differently by a judge in Bursar and another in Amasir? To avoid corruption infiltrating the judiciary, he focused on unifying the law and establishing a general legal code applicable to all judges in the empire, specifically the areas he directly administered. As we mentioned previously, other Arab territories continued to operate under their local laws, with judges referring to different schools of Islamic jurisprudence. It wasn't necessarily the Hanafi school, it depended on the judge in each region. So, Professor Muhammad, I apologize for interrupting, but he wanted to enact this law because he saw a deficiency in the existing Sharia, or rather, a lack of provisions for matters not explicitly addressed in the Sharia. So, let's make laws and get even more stringent with Sharia. That's how it is. And if he made laws, would he abolish Sharia because of them? No. Suleiman would never even consider abolishing Sharia, especially since the Sheikh al-Islam, who was in his time, was Sheikh al-Islam Abu al-Sword Effendi. And Abu al-Sword Effendi is one of the most prominent names in Islamic history. So, you're talking about people whose affiliation and loyalty to Sharia are beyond question. But Sharia, by its very nature, has flexibility. It has existing rulings, then rulings based on ijtihad, independent reasoning, and it leaves room for the ruler. Otherwise, Sharia wouldn't be flexible. It wouldn't be able to accommodate new developments and address new situations. There has to be room for human interpretation, for you to examine the incident and try to find the appropriate ruling, fatwa, or judgment. So, Sharia itself has room for ijtihad, and this room for ijtihad gives the ruler ample room because, as you said, the previous episode discussed how this ruling is one of the most complex matters, involving many factors that force the judge to balance the two benefits to avoid the greater harms and to choose between two evils. So, when we enact a law like Professor Muhammad's and create a comprehensive law, it's not as if we're operating within the realm of ijtihad independent reasoning that you're talking about. The issue lies in the space for ijtihad. When you tell the judge it's a law, you're essentially eliminating the foundation upon which he was standing, which is Sharia, Islamic law, to exercise ijtihad. This is the floor that Sulayman the Magnificent and Abu al-Sord Effendi failed to notice. This is the floor, and it's what we discussed as the beginning of the decline of Islamic civilization, the political or subservient to the state, a part of the state, with laws issued by their state, thus diminishing the scope of ijtihad. The scope of his work narrowed, and he began to focus on schools for preparing and training judges. He also focused on a legal code, a book containing Sharia law in the form of articles, which was revealed to judges. This code culminated in the Majalur al-Arkam al-Adliya Ottoman Civil Code and its appendices and later commentaries. Instead of the judge previously being able to exercise independent judgment, consider the case, and choose from the opinions of the school of thought, or even from outside the school, what was most suitable for the case before him, the judge was now restricted. The ruling stipulated in the article might be unsuitable, inappropriate, and not serve the best interests of the case at hand. This was indeed the floor introduced by Sulayman the Magnificent. I am almost certain that this was neither imagined nor expected by him or anyone else. Of course, because the one who oversaw this process was also one of the great Islamic scholars, Sheikh Abu al-Sord Effendi. It is narrated that Sulayman the Magnificent ordered that Abu al-Sord Effendi's fatwas be buried with him in his grave. It's as if he wanted to apologizes to God that he did not deviate from Sharia, nor did he deviate from the sayings of the scholars and the sayings of the Sheikh al-Islam. Yes, if that means his court had scholars. Yes, and Basil Effendi was an independent figure, and in general, the Sheikh al-Islam was an independent figure to the point that the secularists at the end of the Ottoman state could not depose the caliph except with a fatwa. A fatwa written, is it permissible to depose someone who did this, 1, 3, etc. And he says it is permissible. So, the religious institution remained strong, but this decline occurred, and this means what? The balance that existed between the group of scholars and the group of sultans was disrupted by this choice made by Sultan Sulayman. But of course, after that, you go into the details of the laws, and you will find laws that are all for the benefit. I mean, even the environment. He went to organize it, and the environment had clauses and laws. And of course, in addition to the administrations, the military, the finances, and the transactions, all of this, I mean, the laws of the conquest existed. I mean Sulayman's laws. So I read about him that he was a jurist and he was a poet. So he was fluent in Persian, Turkish, and Ottoman. I mean, Persian and Arabic. I also heard that he was fluent in Arabic. It's mentioned in some sources that he was proficient in Arabic. As for him being a poet, that's certain, at least in Turkish, and if not in Persian, then in Turkish. And the poets of the Ottoman sultans had a nickname, a kind of poetic name. So he had the name Muhibi. Yes, he wrote poetry with it and his poems. Yes, that's right. But Sultan Sulayman, in this great position, truly, when you consider the state of the world at that time, you realize that Sulayman was a blessing from God upon the Muslims, because you can imagine someone who came into existence in an era of rulers who were all powerful, and all with a tendency towards expansion, and all of them, I mean those surrounding the Ottoman state, were enemies. So, if someone like Sulayman the Magnificent hadn't existed, we would expect that the fate of the entire Islamic world would have been extremely difficult, truly very difficult. But the Europeans reached a point where they had to take him into account. I mean, it's not just Turk, of course, because Europe was almost unified at that time. We remember now when we say, for example, and when now, let's talk about Vienna. When we say that he launched 13 imperial campaigns, 8 of them in Central Europe, specifically in the regions of Serbia and Austria, 8 of them exhausted most of his efforts. He didn't succeed in conquering Vienna in the end. Sulayman the Magnificent was there. most powerful European emperor of his time, Charles V. We mentioned, I think, in the episode before last, that Europe was almost unified at that time because Charles V had the circumstances that made him king of almost all of Europe except for some parts. Yes, among them, if I were to explain quickly in case anyone didn't catch what we said, we mentioned that Aragon and Castile united to form the Kingdom of Spain. How did they unite? Ferdinand of Aragon married Isabella of Castile, who created Spain, and they had a daughter named Juana, or Juana in Spanish. So, this one she married the crown prince, Philip, who was also the heir to the Habsburg Empire. The Habsburgs were the kings of the Holy Roman Empire, whose seat of power was Austria. When his brothers, including Joanna, married, they had Charles V. Charles V then controlled Spain. Later the Netherlands and all of Central Europe, including Hungary and Austria. He also controlled parts of Italy. Europe was almost a single state, with only parts of Germany and Italy, and of course Britain, which was far away, consisting of islands in the sea remaining outside its control. This man, Charles V, unified the resources of Europe under his rule, and his treasury was filled with rivers of gold and silver because the Spanish had invaded the Americas, lands rich in gold and silver. The people there were unable to fight or confront this military advance of the Spanish. Therefore, you were in a very dangerous situation, and that's why the Spanish fleet was the strongest fleet in the ocean and the strongest fleet in the Western Mediterranean. This Spanish fleet was able to expand into Morocco and North Africa, reaching Tripoli in 1510. The Spanish intended to remain in North Africa. Charles V was unable to maintain either the unity of the empire, which came to him on a silver platter, or his positions in North Africa, thanks to Suleiman the Magnificent. Of course, thanks be to God first and foremost, without a doubt, but the direct reason was Suleiman the Magnificent. The Safavid, Shah Ismail, the Shah of the Safavid Empire, was unable to expand into Anatolia or the Arab lands thanks to Suleiman the Magnificent. He stopped the Safavid advance once again and was able to annex Iraq and preserve it. The Portuguese were unable to occupy the Arabian Gulf or Yemen thanks to the Ottoman fleets that existed during the time of Suleiman the Magnificent. Yes, even the beginnings of Russian expansion started at that time, and no one was able to expand because the Crimean Khanate was beginning to weaken. Had it not been for the protection of the Ottoman state, we would have expected that this Islamic space is fading and shrinking in the face of Russian expansion. What preserved it was Suleiman the Magnificent. Of course, the major battles that took place in Central Europe and Austria could not have ended in this state were it not for Suleiman the Magnificent. Yes, you are talking about a man who was at the heart of the Islamic world, protecting it from northern, western, southern, and eastern expansions. Okay, Professor Muhammad, excuse me, I made a small digression. So you were reviewing the state of Europe and all that, but we haven't closed the parenthesis of the lore yet. Let's close it so we can intervene at our leisure. So let's put ourselves in the Sultan's place. He rules a very large and vast geography with different ethnicities, sects, shapes, colors, and languages. He, as you told us a little while ago, saw that too. Judges were ruling on the same issue, each in a different way. So he said, I don't want to let the soldiers go and act unilaterally, nor do I want to let the governors make laws as they please. So let's make a law that unifies everything, meaning we organize things in the country. As a result of this, Professor Muhammad, the country has indeed stabilized and has a law in place. We now know how to deal with land if it's to be sold or if someone wants to acquire ownership, because if you open the books he wrote, you'll see he wrote some interesting things. Yes, you know the first phrase I read in his books, he acts according to mean the law he established isn't a law that contradicts Sharia. He established some laws to organize and regulate, but he doesn't want to go beyond religion or Sharia. No, we said that not most, of the laws he established are within the scope of Sharia, whether they are within the scope of Sharia in themselves or in his perception and interpretation. Okay, I mean, there might be some clauses where we disagree on whether they deviate from Sharia or not, but what's certain is that when he established them, he didn't intend, want, or aim to deviate from Sharia. Even the articles that raise doubts are within the context of discretionary punishments. When we consider them, for example, one of the prescribed punishments, for example, the elements of its proof weren't fully met. Okay, you know, the prescribed punishments in Islam have somewhat difficult conditions. For example, a punishment like the punishment for adultery, for instance, requires a difficult condition for proof that 4 people witness the act of adultery. No one commits adultery in public. So, for example, if the suspicion is very strong, but the elements of the punishment are not complete, then a punishment is prescribed. Okay, and so on. For example, regarding the secret, in cases where the amount is less than the minimum threshold, it's true that the hand is not cut off, but I have prescribed a punishment. Okay, so it falls within the framework of Sharia in some respects. Perhaps he chose a less preferred opinion, or something like that, but this is within the realm of ijtihad, independent reasoning. However, I am not one of those who agree that a unified law equals stability and order. This is also a concept present in the modern state, which is the legally unified state. No, therefore, we cite what Abu Ja'far al-Mansur tried to do when he wanted to force people to follow Imam Malik's muwatir. Imam Malik himself refused and said, do not do that. Every people has its own knowledge, and forcing them to follow one thing is difficult. Okay, so Imam Malik himself refused to have his book become a unified law. Well, because when a unified law remains valid, and to some extent, you might say it provides legal stability. However, the problems that this unification has produced are much larger, because, as I reiterate, no text, however brilliant or wise its author, can encompass all people's circumstances. Therefore, after the judge previously had ample room for interpretation and choice, this narrowing of the judge's scope created 2 problems. The first is that the judge's own capacity for independent reasoning diminished. He now simply memorizes one book. He no longer researches, examines, or understands the jurisprudential approaches and the fundamental principles of issuing fatwas or rulings. He simply accepts what is written. The second problem it creates is in people's circumstances. No matter how similar 2 cases may seem, there may be differences that necessitate adjustments or different rulings. The most well-known examples of this are marriage, divorce, and child custody. I say most well-known because these are still prevalent issues in our time. For example, child custody is granted to the father or the mother. Custody before how many years or after how many years? What if the mother gets married? What if the father travels? What if the mother is not trustworthy? What if the father is not trustworthy? What if custody leaves the hands of the father or mother? Who does it go to? Neither the mother's relatives nor the father's relatives. Is it permissible for women related to the mother to be given priority over women related to the father or not? These are matters of jurisprudence with many details. Yes, when the judge had absolute freedom in interpretation, the case would come before him, and he would know what was best for the boy. When he asked, "What relatives do you have who would take care of the child if you hugged him?" for example, or who would take care of the child if you hugged him and he was with you. So the judge, based on what is in front of him, on the case before him, rules. Yes, now, when a law is issued to unify this matter, there will certainly be children who will be lost. There will certainly be children who will be lost, because it is not always with the father or the mother, or even the father and mother themselves will not be suitable to provide for and care for him after divorce. But in the law he kept, for example, wrote, "Do you feel that it is something beautiful?" What is this? Regulations, my brother. The problem is not in matters of interpretation, because from the beginning, since Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, may God be pleased with him, all the Muslim princes and rulers had to take administrative measures and have decisions. Where is the problem? The problem is that this decision doesn't exceed the framework of Sharia law, and we already agree on that. This law he issued falls within the realm of interpretation. Then, someone else comes along at a later time and issues another law, considering a change in interests or circumstances. Now, when Suleiman the Magnificent made laws that became binding on judges, he tampered with it. System in a general sense. That's what he meant by encroaching on the independence of the judiciary. The problem wasn't how to organize the military or how to organize the administration. It was the idea of a unified law being applied to the judiciary. That's the problem. That's what encroachment is. He did it, as I told you, with good intentions, the intention of spreading justice. But anyway, that's what happened, and its negative effects didn't appear during Suleiman the Magnificent's time. They appeared later. So, to summarize, Suleiman the Magnificent wanted to enact a law or system that would subject all authority to a system. What does that mean? To regulate it. This law embodies justice. Justice fulfills Sharia. It's possible in this order. Okay, the logical order is fine, but it's as we said, as I told you. But the central point you made was that this law was the beginning of the decline. Yes, the beginning of the decline in Islamic civilization. And look at the danger of removing the hand of the scholar, the judge, or the jurist from the issue of ijtihad. Yes, exactly, it's dangerous. And that you bring the judge and the scholar down from the balance of power to be part of it. Oh God, how dangerous it is. That's the idea. I mean, Suleiman the Magnificent is a just man and he respects Abu al-Sword Effendi. This is an ideal case, but suppose there is no Suleiman and no Abu al-Sword, there is one tyrant and one evil scholar. What will happen? The two countries will be one alliance. Okay, let's go to what you just painted for us. A very nice picture. Good, we're done. We've closed the arc of the lore. Dies. Okay, our duty is to explain why he was called Suleiman the Magnificent. Now we come to a major turning point in the life of this sultan, which is the attempt to conquer Vienna. Okay, what I'm going to say is in short, and there are some elaborations, meaning there's a departure from accuracy. Okay, as for Europe during the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, we can say that it had three main powers: the Holy Roman Empire, which we can say was centered in Vienna and which practically controlled Germany; the Spanish Empire, which was formed with the union of Ferdinand and Isabella, and they expelled the Muslims from Andalusia; and the Italian power. This Italian power considered the papacy an independent power, but the Italian power, which is Genoa and Venice, were large empires that controlled the skies in the Mediterranean with their powerful fleets. Yes, Hungary was with whom? Within the Holy Roman Empire, meaning within Austria, meaning within Germany. Oh, that doesn't mean it. It doesn't mean
لأن إحنا قُلنا
أيام
محمد
الفاتح.
الفاتح
آه.
لم يستطع أن يدخل بلجراد اللي هي عاصمة الصرب أصلًا،
أيوه، طيب.
والصرب قبل المجر.
إمم.
تمام؟
No, not with
وبالتالي
whom, not with Suleiman the
الجهاد
Magnificent.
الفتح
No, not with
ده كان
Suleiman the
اختيار
Magnificent.
أولي.
No, no,
كويس؟
no, not with him.
القوة
Because we
الأولية
said
دي
that maimed the
بلجراد
conqueror
اللي هي
couldn't
عاصمة
enter
الصرب اللي
Belgrade,
بتمثل
which is the
المدفعية
capital of
أمام
Serbia. Yes, and
المجرتان
Serbia
الأخرى اللي
before
بيتكلم
Hungary.
عنها
Okay,
قصدي
so
زمن
this
سليمان مش زي
situation,
المجر
this is
الدولة
how
الضعيفة
the
التعبانة اللي
European
عايشة في
powers
بلجراد.
looked.
أيوه،
These
أيوه.
European
دي
powers,
كانت مصر
Belgrade, which is the capital of Serbia,
وتشيكوسلوفاكيا اللي
which
هي
represents
عاصمة
the gateway to Hungary. Of
آآ
course, the
وبقت
Hungary we're talking
تشيكوسلوفاكيا
about, I mean the time of
والتشيك
Suleiman,
الاتنين مع
isn't the
بعض، ودلوقتي
weak,
شمال
tired Hungary we
المجر
don't see now.
وشمال
Yes,
كرواتيا
yes, it's the
و
small one. This Hungary was
وشمال
Hungary and
الغرب رومانيا
Czechoslovakia,
الحالي.
which is now
تمام؟
divided into Czechia
حالي
and Slovakia.
الإمبراطورية.
Slovenia. So
تمام؟
Czechia and
طيب
Slovakia together
هنا
are
مش
now
العاصمة
northern
الجديدة بتاعتهم
Hungary and
دلوقتي،
Hungary and northern
ده
Croatia and
واحد اسمه
also
الملك
western Romania.
لادروش.
All of this was Hungary. Yes,
الملك
I'm
لادروش ده
talking
ما
about
كانش
the
عنده أولاد،
empire. Okay.
وكان
Sons and his
وكانت
sister
أخته
was
متزوجة من واحد اسمه فريدناند. فريدناند ده مين؟
married to a man
أخشم.
named Ferdinand. Ferdinand was the brother of Charles V.
فبالتالي
Yes, that's
ألادروش
right.
ده لو مات
So,
أو حصل له أي حاجة، أولى
if
الناس
Largos died
بهيئته
or
له
anything happened to
وملكه
him, the
هو صهره اللي هو
person
فرديناند
most
ده
entitled to
اللي هو
inherit his
موجود في
kingdom
الاسم.
would be his
تمام؟
son-in-law, Ferdinand, who was in
فحصل له
Austria. Yes, that's right.
أول
And this
اشتباك
is
بينه
where the
وبين
first
البروس
major clash
اللي هم
occurred
النمسا.
because if
لو
Ferdinand,
استولى
who
على
was in
مصر
Austria,
ونشر
were
مكان
to
الخامس ده
conquer
هيدمر
Hungary, then
كل
Charles
أوروبا اللي
V
عندهم
would
مصالح.
be emperor of all of Europe except
وده
France
طبعا
and
كان
Italy.
توغل
Yes, and
خطير ومهدد. فسليمان
this
القانوني
was, of
دعاهم
course, a
بالتالي إلى
dangerous and
مشاركتهم
threatening
في
unification.
حملة إلى
So,
بلجراد.
in the year immediately following his
وانتصر محمد
accession,
الفاتح.
Suleiman the Magnificent
وده
launched
رجعنا
a campaign to
علشان نقول
Belgrade,
إن
which stopped
العثمانيين ما
maimed the
كانوش مهتمين
conqueror.
بالسيطرة
This
على العالم
brings us
العربي
back to the point that the
ويعني
Ottomans
كمشوها
were
كده
not
كأنها
interested
خطة
in controlling the
الناس
Arab world,
بمجرد ما
as we
تتبت
discussed
لهم
in the
العالم
previous
العربي أصلا ده
episode.
قبل ما
As
تتكون
soon as they
دولة
had consolidated their control over the
استكنفوا
Arab
محلهم
world,
في
or
أوروبا.
even before it
وطبعا هم
was
على فكرة
fully
حتى كانوا سايبين
established,
في
they
العالم العربي
resumed their
ناس مماليك، يعني
conquests
زي
in
برج الغزالي
Europe,
كان
and
موجود
of
في الشام.
course, they even left
الجزائر بيكون
Mamluk
موجود في
people in
مصر.
the Arab world.
يعني ما حدش
Jambird
يعتبر دولة
al-Ghazali was in the
عثمانيين زي ما
Levant,
هم
Kar
أو
Bey
تتراء
was in
يعني.
Egypt. They
طيب
didn't even
حملة
rule with
بلجراد في
Ottoman
السنة الأولى
governors, either from among
استطاع أن
themselves or the
يفتح بلجراد
Turks. So,
في
the
شهر
first
رمضان سنة
year, with a
910
locust
هجرية اللي
campaign,
هي
he managed to
1402
conquer Belgrade in Ramadan of
فتح بلجراد. بلجراد كانت
927 R,
مقدمة
which is
للفتح
1521 AD. He
للجيش
conquered Belgrade with
العثماني
the
في
locusts,
زمان
and
كده
this was a
إبراهيمي.
prelude to the conquest of a city
فالجزء
that is now
الجنوبي اسمه
called
بودا
Budapest.
والجزء
But
الشمالي اسمه
back
بلجراد.
then, there was
فبودا
a
دي كانت
river
هي
between
عاصمة
them, so the
المجر في ذلك
southern
الوقت.
part was called Buder and the
وهناك
northern
عدى
part
بودا
was
باسمه،
called
وهنا بودا
Pest.
بقى
Buder was
دار
the capital of
المعركة
Hungary at that
الرهيبة
time, and
يعني
there,
معركة
near
مهرس
Budapest, or
التي أبيد
rather,
فيها
near
الجيش
Buder, took
المجري
place the
وكان
great and
نصرا
terrible
هائلا
battle, the
ونصرا
Battle of
قويا
Mackay,
في
in
غاية
which the
القوة
Hungarian army was
للإمبراطورية
annihilated. It was a
العثمانية.
tremendous and very powerful victory
كان
for the Ottoman
كان
Empire or
يتجنب
state. Yes,
سليمان أن تؤول أملاك المجر
here, in
هذه
order
إلى
to
فرديناند،
prevent
فما
Suleiman
يحصلش
from
التوحد اللي احنا
these
بنقول عليه.
Hungarian possessions falling into
عهد
Ferdinand's hands, so
لإدارتها
that the
للتاريخ
unification, we
كانت
call it, would not
ليرتزم فيها
happen.
على
He
خلاف الأندلس
entrusted its
وخلاف عهد
administration
فرديناند
to an emir.
اسمه
There was a
زغلول.
Hungarian prince who was
تمام.
at odds with both
فجاء
Louis
به
and
على أساس أن
Ferdinand. His
يكون
name was
حاكما
Bolivar. Yes,
تابعا
that's right.
للسيادة
So, he was
العثمانية.
brought in to be a governor,
يا ترى عمل كده
subordinate to
ليه؟
Ottoman sovereignty.
هل مثلا ليه ما حكمهاش
Why
بنفسه
did he
مثلا؟
do that?
في
For
رأي بيقول لك
example, why
إنه
didn't he
لم
rule it
يستطع أن يحكمها
himself?
بنفسه.
Some
شوف
say
المدى
he couldn't
2013.
rule it himself. Look at the
خصوصا إن
distance
هو
between
عنده مشاكل
Hungary
في
and
الإيه؟ في
Istanbul,
الصفوية
especially
فاضطر
since
يرجع
he had
للصفوية.
problems with their
وفي
Safavid
ناس
state.
بتقول إن هو يعني
So, he
أراد
was
إنه
forced
يخفف
to
من ردة
return,
فعل
and some
العالم
say that he
الإسلامي
wanted to mitigate
ويمنعه
the
من الانحراف
reaction of
لأنه
the
تصور
Christian
إنه
world and prevent it from uniting
لما
again.
يبقى سليمان هيحكم
Because if
بنفسه
Suleiman were
بالعثمانيين
to
هذا قد يكتل العالم
rule it
المسيحي،
himself with the
خصوصا إن
Ottomans,
كان
this
في
might unite the
انقسامات
Christiان
وحركات في
world,
ذلك الوقت
especially since
أيوه.
divisions were
في
beginning
أوروبا
to
زي
emerge
الانقسام
in
المذهبي
Europe at that
الكاثوليكي
time, namely
البروتستانتي.
the Catholic Protestant
تمام.
schism.
وهذا
Yes,
الانقسام
That's right. So, you could say that Suleiman the Magnificent intervened in this schism because he wanted to prevent the European powers from uniting against him. And when the Catholics were persecuting the Protestants were fleeing to the freedoms of the Ottoman state. The Ottoman Empire, or rather, the countries ruled by Catholics, were persecuting the Protestants. Those ruled by Protestants were persecuting the Catholics. Yes, and Charles V, of course, was a very strict Catholic, meaning he was one of the leading figures of the Inquisition. He was very terrible in the matter of the Inquisition, although less bad than his father and his sons after him. So, he tried to persecute the Protestants, but he ended up signing an agreement in which he respected the sects. Yes, that's why some Europeans, perhaps Hammer, who is the man who wrote the great book on the history of the Ottoman state, say that all the Protestant rulers owe their survival to Suleiman the Magnificent. If it weren't for Suleiman the Magnificent, Charles would have wiped out Protestantism and the Protestant kings. Okay, so here the clash between these two powers. Ottoman state happened. Where did this clash happen? Vienna, the capital of the Holy Roman Empire, which is now the capital of Austria, was captured. Capturing it would have been a significant blow to one of the three major European powers and would have opened the door to all of Europe. If this city had fallen and the Ottomans had ruled it themselves, we can imagine that the British and other European powers, whether Italian or Spanish, would have withered away. Where was Charles V? Was he in Hamburg or Spain? He was in Spain. He has no connection to that. No, he does. I'm telling you, his brother is the current king of Austria. His brother, Ferdinand, is the king of Austria, and his brother is subordinate to him. So Charles was the great emperor. Yes, and Hungary, which is present-day Hungary, whose capital is Budapest, which is present-day Hungary. Yes, which is Eastern Europe. Let's say yes, it is Eastern Europe. Yes. So, he went to the siege of Vienna in 1529 and 1532, two campaigns. The first campaign was the fiercest and most intense in its attempt, and the second campaign was not the same, but both campaigns failed. My point is, when I answer your question now, what is the importance of Vienna? Vienna was a stronghold between the two powers, because after the Ottomans took control of Serbia, the two great kingdoms became contiguous. We are now on the border. Therefore, Vienna was the city where the power of the Holy Roman Empire resided, and we can say it was the second most important city after Madrid in the empire that had been unified under Charles V. Yes. When Suleiman the Magnificent attacked it, there was a 19-day siege. This was the first siege in 1529 AD. This first siege, I want to say it was a turning point in all of history, European history and Ottoman history as well. If you read European history, you will read an epic struggle waged by the Austrians in defense of Vienna, to the point that even the great Sultan of the world, Suleiman the Magnificent, was unable to breach it. And of course, the European account is full of details, and certainly, I'm not saying the European account is false. No, certainly not. Don't ignore the European account. There's no doubt that the defenders of Vienna were at the peak of their bravery, resilience, and patience, because they killed and wounded 14,000 Turks, 14,000 Ottoman soldiers. Yes, you're talking about a huge number. How many was the Muslim army, Professor Muhammad? It was 80,000 at that time. 80,000. Yes, because there's an account that says 1,200. That was the second campaign. Yes, it was bitter. The second campaign was bitter, and it also failed. Glory be to God. Okay, fine. So what made the first siege an epic one? It was that Charles V didn't come to the aid of the Ottomans, and Ferdinand himself, who was its king, fled and abandoned it. He didn't want to confront the Ottoman army so as not to be annihilated like the Hungarian army in the Moats, who takes a city and brings a governor over it, for example, from Austria or someone like Zabalier, and then we go and try to get it back again, is better than us being exposed to the annihilation of the army. So the empire goes with its cities, its men, its army. Yes, and they evacuated the city. There were no more in the city than what is said to be 3,000. They are the ones who took it upon themselves to defend. So the European narrative presents an epic legend about how these few thousand were able to hold out and not allow Vienna to be opened. Glory be to God! It seems our kings are accustomed to the story of fleeing, because, by the way, we besieged it again. Later, I mean, during the time of Ahmed Roman III Murad, maimed Roman IV later on, which was in 1683, and we almost, if it weren't for the magnificent Sultan, if it weren't for the other reasons. The Ottoman narrative says, yes, it's true, we besieged it, and it's true we wanted to conquer it, and it's true we failed to conquer it, but not because of the bravery of the defenders. Rather, it wasn't Suleiman's goal to conquer it. His goal was to deter the Austrian or German army. Otherwise, he would have been sitting in front of it for 19 days. But if he wanted to conquer it, he would have been sitting in front of it for longer. He sat in front of Belgrade for 34 days. He sat in front of the island of Rhodes for 119 days. So, this story of 19 days is just evidence. Although Suleiman didn't intend to conquer it as much as he wanted to prevent Austria from interfering in Hungary's affairs, to remove the ruler he had installed after the conquest of Belgrade. Yes, that was the main reason. The second thing was that winter came early that year, so many Ottoman soldiers, cavalry, and horses were stranded. The ground became muddy, making it impossible to remain there. Otherwise, we would have to sacrifice the army itself. Winter arrived, of course. This was in October, and that's why October 14th is a significant date for Europeans, as it marks one of the most important events that occurred on that day. Suleiman the Magnificent's failed attempt to storm Vienna. Honestly, October has been the month of important events throughout history. Laughter. So, what I mean is that October 14th isn't theoretically the date of the worst winter, but that year there was a severe winter, and that's what caused the Ottoman army to falter. Another piece of evidence they cite is that Suleiman didn't bring the large siege engines that were in Buder to use against Vienna. That's also evidence of if we were not, or rather, it was not one of the original objectives. Of course, the other people say that he could not take it because of the severity and the surrounding land. Where would he take it? Okay. In any case, I am presenting the two views, but the conclusion is that they could not open it and returned. Well, repeat this attempt after 3 years, in the year 1532. Yes, and prepare for it with greater preparation and a larger army. What were the reasons? The reasons are always that Zapalier, whose vassal ruler was Zapalier of Hungary, would come to Ferdinand and encroach on his lands or try to overthrow him, or because he later died, leaving his wife and a 15-day-old infant son. So, it was an opportunity for him to advance into Hungary and reclaim it from the Ottomans. At that moment, Suleiman's army would come again to ensure Zapalier's or His vassal princes remained in power in Hungary. Yes, Suleiman was present in the second campaign. Yes, he was present in it. I mean, the imperial campaign. Well, the imperial campaign was different, and of course, he went out for it much better prepared. On the other hand, Ferdinand this time prepared for a more extensive siege. I said he was coming into us the first time. I said 3,000, but I was wrong. A real number was 200,000. 200,000 in this second campaign, and there is a story that says 17,000. Okay, but what I settle on is that they 20,000, but in this second campaign, there was also greater European preparedness. Fisher V shifted his allegiance, and Ferdinand remained in the city. And I didn't even mention that Charles himself came to the city. The number inside Vienna at that time was 78,000, meaning about 80,000. Oh, 4 times the first time. So, things became much more difficult. Okay, and then there's this small city called Bernz in German, or Kosciuszko if I pronounced it correctly. This city is about a few kilometers before Vienna. I've forgotten now whether it's east of Hungary or west of Romania, but it's just below Austria, a short distance below Vienna. This city, with its 700 inhabitants, also managed to withstand Suleiman's army. He couldn't bypass it or conquer it by force. Look, he conquered many fortresses and many cities, but this city, when I read about it, it reminds me of Gar. Small city with unparalleled bravery, was able to change history and halt an army for 3 weeks. If the army hadn't been held back during those 3 weeks, we might have expected them to storm the city. But those 3 weeks provided a tremendous opportunity to fortify the city and increase the number of soldiers within it. Indeed, Suleiman could not cross it except through a peace agreement, a treaty allowing them passage. So, Suleiman's goal was to draw his enemies into an open war outside the city. It's clear that the lesson from the previous time had been learned. He knew that besieging a city in this manner and attempting to storm it was no easy feat. Charles and Ferdinand, along with their enemies, were adamant that they would never confront the Ottoman army in open terrain. At this point, the situation reached a standstill, and both sides considered themselves victorious. One side believed the enemy army had fled and hadn't dared to engage them, while the other believed the enemy army had failed to breach the city, thus concluding that the campaign was over. There was no victor, no loser, no vanquished. But here, Stanford, the well-known historian, was saying that this second campaign was where Suleiman learned that battles of this magnitude could not be fought in such remote regions. It was as if the Ottoman Empire had reached its maximum capacity for expansion. Yes, now we had a long supply line that could not withstand prolonged sieges in an environment unsuitable for armies to remain. So, the failure occurred at Vienna, and it was not repeated afterward. I mean, there were attempts at Vienna, but they continued. I'm talking now about 3 campaigns of the campaign of Bajrad, the first campaign, and the second campaign at Vienna. These are 3 campaigns. There are 5 more campaigns in the same context and with the same objective. With Ferdinand, who was Charles's representative, when he tried to expand again into Hungary or to seize lands that were under Ottoman control, the overall final result was that the Ottomans had the upper hand. The agreement that was signed was a Treaty of Submission. Ferdinand was essentially Suleiman's Grand Vizier. The agreement stipulated that he would obey Suleiman as a son obeys his father, and that Ferdinand's allegiance to Suleiman did not diminish his allegiance to his brother Charles V. However, Charles V was never referred to as emperor. Europe only had one emperor, and that was Suleiman. Oh yes, there are other details. Ultimately, Charles V and Ferdinand gave Suleiman what he wanted. Even his withdrawal from Vienna was in exchange for a very important city near Vienna called Giajayi, something like that. I don't remember the name exactly. The overall result was that the Ottomans held sway in that area, so that explains the importance of Vienna and why the Ottomans were so focused on it. What would have happened if they had been able to conquer Vienna? But in the end, since a treaty was signed and they gave Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent what he wanted, we failed, but in the end, the prestige of the Ottoman state remained in the hearts and minds of Europeans. No doubt very great. Yes, and they take it into serious consideration. That's true. That prevents him from trying to undermine it when he feels that things are favorable. But in the end, Suleiman died. He died at the Shajfara fortress in these same areas. He died hours before the fortress was opened. Oh, God is great. He died hours before the fortress was opened. God is great. So, if we had conquered it, what could have happened? As I mentioned, if we had conquered it and the Ottomans had been able to control it and make it an advanced city under their control, then the expectation is that all the remaining European powers would have withered and weakened, whether power of the southern Italian kingdoms. This would have meant the ease of conquering Rome, and this would have meant the ease of Europe entering Islam. A second prophecy would have been fulfilled. Yes, the prophecy would have been fulfilled. God is great. If we had conquered it, could we have regained Andalusia? It was possible by God. Yes, it was possible, of course, because this tremendous revival was like I do and want to say Constantinople, I want to say consider it less than Constantinople, with a quarter of it, that's it. I mean, if it had been because Rome, or the Vatican, or the papacy, didn't have the military power that we have, it's more like a city. I told you that Constantinople held both meanings. It was the holy city religiously and the strong, politically fortified city, the capital of the Roman Empire at that time. It wasn't like that. So if it had happened, of course, it would have been a different history, and what it would have revived in the Muslims and the people of North Africa, and what it would have led to in terms of frustration and a collapse in the morale of the Europeans. Glory be to thought. Yes, we would have continued like that towards Germany, entered France and landed in 2 weeks. He wouldn't even be in Germany anymore because the German power was present here. I mean, yes, of course. Okay, let's get to the 2 issues, Professor Muhammad, that we raised at the beginning of the episode. Oh, the first one is the story that he was a womanizer, and the issue of the harem and what it has been distorted through dramas and series, unfortunately, is the problem of the harem, or the problem of women in general. It's a recurring problem in European history, more so than in Islamic history. One form of distortion, it's the Europeans who started this rumor, is that Europeans are very interested in it. I mean, what I want to say is they have a lot of issues of attack and distortion regarding women. Yes, this is very common among them. When they want to distort someone, they approach them through the door of women. Yes, we as Muslims don't have this issue unless Muslims don't have a problem with a sultan or king having 4 wives and a large number of concubines unless one of 2 things happens: either he transgresses or takes a forbidden path, or his love for women distracts him from important matters, distracts him from the duties of the caliphate, distracts him from the duties of the armies. Muslims see this as an instinct, just like the instinct for food and drink, the instinct for women, the instinct to eat and drink. Do what you want, provided you don't cross the line from permissible to forbidden, and don't let this desire and appetite prevent you from fulfilling your duties and obligations. Now, someone like Sultan Suleiman, or anyone else, a warrior fulfilling his obligations, if he's fulfilling these obligations, meaning he hasn't committed anything forbidden and it hasn't prevented him from fulfilling his duties, then marrying 4 wives and having 100 or 200 concubines, this isn't something to be ashamed of for Muslims, and indeed it is. For us Muslims, someone like Suleiman the Magnificent isn't something to criticize because it's not proven that he had any illicit relationships. No one has spoken about this issue, and of course, you can't say that it prevented him from fulfilling his obligations. He was at the height of his power, the Sultan of the world in his time, and he spent 10 years, 7 months, and 7 days solely as a warrior. So you can't say that he was obsessed with women or that it indicated that, for us Muslims, this is how it is. But then comes the problem of unclear meaning. Islamic love or a woman's love, or the pyramid of Sultanah, is in the matter of Prince Mustafa, and this is what connects the two topics. But first, to close the matter, the Europeans were the ones who spread the rumor about him. When they felt they couldn't break the power of the Ottoman state, they said, let's tarnish their image and reputation and say that they are people who like concubines. This is the entry point. Europeans don't see the matter that way. A European sees it, of course, and he has a Christian culture, the essence of which is monasticism and limiting the number of women, even if he later knows many people in forbidden relationships. But the ideal model for the European is the man who is married to one wife and is faithful to her. This is the ideal model. This ideal model is not the same for Muslims. For meaning one, she's neither a wife nor a concubine. If your love for women prevents you from fulfilling your duties, that's what's considered forbidden. Europeans, by nature, consider a man with many wives a disgrace, a major flaw. But for Muslims, this isn't considered a flaw. So, Suleiman wasn't an exception, nor was he different from any Ottoman Sultan or any other Islamic Sultan who had concubines, especially since, as we mentioned, after Yazid I captured a woman, the Ottoman sultans refrained from marrying or considering women as wives. This was because if a woman was captured, as Yazid's wife was, she wouldn't be considered a wife, but a concubine. So, there wouldn't be any kind of humiliation, belittlement, or insult to the Sultan. Yes, that's right. Therefore, it was customary for them to take concubines without marrying them. Yes, that's right. So, that's the end of the story. Now, what will bring up the topic of Kulthum, or Roxolana? She was a concubine of the Sultan, originally Russian, a Russian concubine. She is Hurrem and Roxolana. They are one. Yes, this is her Western name and this is her Arabic or Ottoman name. So, here, this wife or this concubine, this concubine, Suleiman, was entrusted with her. He loved her. Well, for us, this is normal. He even went against the custom of his predecessors, so he freed her and married her. So, we know that he loved her very much, yes, because she became very dear to him, and she rose from being a wife, a concubine, to being a wife, a husband. Okay, as I told you, we have no problem with him loving the concubine. We have no problem with him freeing the wife. We have no problem with all of this within the bounds of what is permissible, and he is free. But what made the matter bigger and took on higher dimensions is what happened with Prince Mustafa. Prince Mustafa, of course, was Suleiman. He had perhaps 5 or 6 children, one of whom died early, and another who also died during his reign. But in short, we have reached Prince Mustafa, who was his eldest son and reached the age of 38. Yes, we're all right. Sultan Suleiman lived until he was 74 years old according to the Hijri calendar. So, Prince Mustafa wasn't one of Roxelana's sons. He was a son of another concubine. I honestly forget their names. Sometimes she was called Mardan. I don't know what that means, and sometimes Dhulbahar. Dhulbahar means spring rose or rose spring. Anyway, sources agree that Mustafa was a beloved prince among the army and the people. He was a talented prince and a distinguished military leader. Now, Roxelana, if we think about it from her perspective, wanted her sons to be the heirs, whether out of a mother's natural love for her children, or perhaps out of fear that if Mustafa came to power, he might kill them, as was sometimes the case in the Ottoman Empire. He might accuse them of rebellion, rightfully or wrongfully, or even get into conflict with them. The important thing is that she wanted to pave the way for her sons, and that's where the conspiracy happened. Of course, this is just one story. It is a historical fact agreed upon by the Ottomans and by non-Ottomans, meaning by the Europeans, that Roxelana's daughter married the Grand Vizier, Rustam Pasha. Yes. So we have around the Sultan who was at work, the Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha, and at home Roxelana and his daughter, who is Marimer, who is the owner of the mosque that is on the first wall of Fateh. Yes, Marimer. What is Marimer's authority? Rustam's wife. Yes, she is the daughter of Sultan Suleiman. So, she wove the conspiracy recounted in Ottoman history books, which led Sultan Suleiman to believe that his son was preparing to rebel against him and overthrow him. She wove a conspiracy, meaning that the reason for it was that his father, Mustafa, was challenging Roxelana. Of course, I don't know if there was a conflict within the harem or not, but the apparent political interpretation given by the Ottomans is that this woman wanted to pave the way for her sons. So, how could she pave the way for her sons? She had to remove the crown prince. Well, the crown prince is a beloved and powerful figure, and even the army is inclined towards him. So, through the daughter and through the Grand Vizier, and certainly through her as well, the conspiracy was hatched that claimed Mustafa was plotting a coup against Suleiman. Mustafa was communicating with the Safavid Shah in Iran. Mustafa was gathering this army to use it to overthrow the Sultan. Mustafa was taking these measures to win the army, the Janissaries, over to his side. And pay attention, in their culture, if we delve into their minds, we will find a very close example, which is the example of Salim when he turned against his father, Yazid. I mean, in the end, if she were sitting with him, what would she say to him? You'll tell him, you can't trust anyone either, because your father Salim did the same thing and turned against his father. So, my point is, there's a culture where it's possible for a son to turn against his father, even within Ottoman history. By the way, Mustafa's father, I know his name is Mardi Devran. Yes, Mardi Devran. I'm telling you, I don't know what Mardivan means. Okay, let's fix it. The letters V and W are sometimes written like that, so there are exchanged messages that are forged. A message from the Sultan to Mustafa, the Grand Vizier, and his circle take the message and write another one. A message from Mustafa to the Sultan passes through the Grand Vizier's circle, and he takes the message and writes another one. So, the situation escalates, the dialogue intensifies, the tone between the two sides escalates, and Mustafa doesn't understand what's happening at all. Eventually, Suleiman decides to kill him after he realizes that he's communicating with the Safavid Shah and that he was preparing to overthrow him. He summoned him while he was in the midst of his campaign against Iran. Where was Mustafa at that time when the correspondence was taking place? He was in the east. Mustafa was in the east, meaning he was in charge of Diyarbakir and those eastern regions. Yes, he was governor of them. Yes, he was in charge of them at that time. So, while he was in the midst of his campaign against the Safavid state, he summoned him to his tent. Of course, he came without any problem. So he killed him by strangulation. His father killed him by strangulation. Yes, he killed him with his own hands. Yes, not with his own hands. Or they said that it was through the team, the people who were around the people, a group of deaf people who couldn't hear. They were the team that carried out such operations. Oh dear, and he was looking at him. Of course, this caused turmoil, confusion, and anger in the army, which forced Sulayman to dismiss the Grand Vizier, Rustam Pasha, whom Mustafa's supporters saw as being the cause. And even if he wasn't the cause, he was the only one who could say, execute him. He would tell him, execute your daughter or execute your wife. There is no one. What does that mean? Okay, look, this story is agreed upon. As I said, it was transmitted by the Ottomans. So, the story that Sultan Sulayman the Magnificent killed his son Mustafa, this happened. It's not a rumor, no, it's not fabrication, it's not exaggeration, it's not online trolling, it's nothing to us. Yes, Ottoman historians transmitted it. But it's said that Abu al-Sword Effendi, the Sheikh al-Islam, was the one who issued the fatwa to Sulayman. Yes, but Abu al-Sword Effendi saw that he was requesting a fatwa. Someone is preparing for a coup and communicating with the Safavid Shah. This will split the ranks. I mean, naturally, you can't say this fatwa is wrong. The Mufti tells you, the questioner asks, now, if you come and tell me I prayed this way, or I did that way, I performed ablution, what you're telling me is what makes me give you the fatwa. Suppose you're hiding something that isn't in the Mufti's time. Okay, Professor Muhammad, someone like me, I mean, let's suppose I'm Mustafa and I entered the tent and there were several correspondences between me and the Sultan, and the matter became tense. We weren't sitting together. Act like that. He's a
وهو اشطر من اخوه شو اسمه الثاني هذا سليم سليم الثاني اللي حيجينا بعد شوي
streetwise guy, you know. He understands that this is a leader, and he's smarter than his brother. What's his other name? This is Selim. Oh, Selim Roman, too, who's coming to us here in a bit. I don't know, I'm speaking logically here. It's not good. You're the logic or reasoning. When you have all the details, we must also know, guys, that it's arrogance to imagine that you were more capable of handling the same situation than the people involved, who have all the details. We're ultimately the ones who gather fragments from history. Sometimes you find two friends who have been together for a long time, and then one situation causes a misunderstanding between them and they remain estranged, or even their relationship is severed, and then he discovers that there was a misunderstanding. But what about these matters involving details within the palaces? Ultimately, historians, no matter what they recount, only convey a fraction. It's difficult, very difficult, to imagine that someone like Sultan Selim Sulayman was deceived. It's difficult, very difficult, to imagine that someone like Mustafa was naive. It's difficult, but that doesn't mean I'm saying that anyone is above deception. No one is above deception. Everyone can be deceived. Everyone can be humiliated and listen to others. Anyone can listen to their spouse or be deceived by their spouse. No one is immune to this, but ultimately you can't say that you have the complete picture that allows you to judge the matter. Indeed, no one has the complete picture, but I reiterate that the killing of Prince Mustafa and the fact that we are still discussing it after 500 years is one of the proofs of the greatness of this religion, which makes us stand before a great sultan who benefited Muslims, even though he made a mistake. In the end, it was a personal mistake, and the victim was his son. I mean, the scale of Sharia, the scale of morality, which he's sitting there, dominating us, making us sit here holding Sulayman accountable for killing his son. If it weren't for our moral sense, if we Muslims didn't have a moral sense, this would be normal for us. I mean, What's the difference between us living 500 years ago and those who lived 400 or 300 years ago? What difference did they have between Mustafa and Selim? Is there a significant difference? No, there are no significant differences for us. What matters to Muslims is that Suleiman the Magnificent was more moral, more intelligent, and more merciful. That's why this matter pains them, and that's why we're discussing it. Now, if they didn't have these morals, it wouldn't have been anything. Okay, for those who aren't paying attention, we can't justify it. Yes, that's right. It's good you told me. I'm not justifying it. Yes, it's wrong. Laughs killing any person without a crime is a big mistake and a big crime. This statement, if true, is wrong. On the scale of Suleiman the Magnificent's sins, we don't know all the details. Ultimately, the very fact that we're sitting here saying these things is proof of the greatness of our religion, because it instilled in us this moral sensitivity that prevents us from overlooking a single crime committed by a sultan who ruled for 46 years, a period marked by numerous achievements. To complicate matters further, you complicate things and they insult us with no, God forbid, laughter. Besides, someone like Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent would never kill his son unless he was certain he had ruined everything. That's what I'm trying to say. It's difficult to imagine he was naive or deceived. I'm not saying I deny it 100%. It's very possible he was deceived, that he fell victim to a conspiracy. But, my friends, before you rush to form an opinion on a matter we only know from historians' accounts, know your limits and the extent of your information. And surely Suleiman wouldn't have wanted to kill his son. You're not going to be more compassionate than Suleiman on his son, and you won't be more concerned about Suleiman's state than Suleiman himself. Yes, it's very possible he had a point of view. It's possible, because we don't know. But sir, he's innocent and we do. And no, based on what has reached us, we assess this as a wrong act, a crime, and it's on the scale of Suleiman the Magnificent's sins. Well, Professor Muhammad, we can accept that. His women and those around him influenced the leader's decision. Yes, it's reasonable, very reasonable. No, excuse me, no. A man in front of women becomes like a puppet, meaning he just goes along. No, neither this nor that. Now we are both married. Yes, that's right, and we know how women can influence us. And whoever is watching us, if they are married, will know this very well. And sometimes women, sometimes women, they exhausted us. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was told one day that he had divorced his wives. Yes, and the Prophet was reproached. There was a matter revealed because his wives burdened him with it. The Prophet's words were revealed. O Prophet, why do you forbid what Allah has made lawful for you, seeking to please your wives? Or, when the Prophet ate honey from a rear, what happened was that they said, we will tell him his breath smells bad, so he will refrain from eating honey. And indeed, they said that to him, so he refrained from eating honey. Then the words of Allah were revealed. Why do you forbid what Allah has made lawful for you, seeking to please your wives? This happens sometimes. And then, when I told you, I meant that the Prophet divorced his wives, and the words of Allah were revealed. O Prophet, say to your wives, if you desire the life of this world and its adornments, then come, I will provide for you and release you. So, I will release you with a beautiful release. My point is that the issue of a man being burdened by his wife is something that happens to everyone, and even the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was not immune to it. Sometimes, even though he was the best of mankind and his wives were the best of women, yes, no one is immune to being affected by the words of his wife's mother, so no one can pretend otherwise. A strong man, and he's not affected. By the way, you really mean a lot to us. We're just trying to make you understand the truth. How are you doing? Yes, okay. Sir, and then, man, it's enough for you that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said that lying is not permissible except in 3 cases, and he mentioned among them a man lying to his wife. Yes, I mean, the truth is you won't get anywhere if you don't know how to soften things up. And then, when a husband loves his wife very, very much, he becomes a little more lenient with decisions and he gets along and makes things easier. And by the way, in our Islamic world, expressing submission to one's beloved was not something we just did, but poets took pride in it. I mean Harun al-Rashid, among the things he said about 3 of his concubines, look at the verses. What does he say to you? What did the 3 young women own? My reins and my heart are loose in every place. Why do all the wilderness obey me and I obey them while they are in my disobedience? That is only because the Sultan of Passion is strong and powerful than the Sultan of God. Well said, Sheikh. Well said, and the poet's tongue are, so it is possible that he was deceived, it is possible that he was influenced by his wife, it is possible that he knew this and his judgment. He also said that his daughter, yes, the daughter of the Sultan was the architect Sinan who wanted to propose to her or marry her. He went and God knows maybe to whom, to Rustam. She married Rustam. Yes, so what did the architect Sinan do? He built 2 mosques called Miramar Sultan, one on the Asian side and one on the European side. The sun rises on its birthday between the 2 minarets of Miramar Sultan on the Asian side and sets between the 2 minarets of Miramar Sultan on the European side. Wow. Oh, this is amazing. Look, because you're interested in the well, you made an episode about this topic. I made a whole episode in which I gathered everything related to the architecture of Sinan and his history, especially the 2 minarets. Yes, no, I talked about the Sulaimani Mosque and the entire complex around it, but it has a series, God willing. I need this episode. Oh no, this man is not ordinary. Truly. If we wanted to summarize Suleiman the Magnificent in 2 words, Professor Muhammad, what could we say about him? We could say, well, what we mentioned at the beginning, that Suleiman the Magnificent was the last pinnacle of Islamic history. Yes, and way, he had many in our Islamic books and Arab history. I mean al-Karmarni in his book Akbar al-Duwal and the works of Ibn al-Imad al-Habarli in Shadharat al-Dahab. He was a great sultan. It's strange, Professor Muhammad, that the Turkish dramas, I don't understand how they dared to make this series, Harim al-Sultan, and distort his reputation and image. Honestly, brother, it's astonishing. A secular wing and other factors still exist in Turkey, which continues to suffer from the effects of the secular period. The reading of Ottoman history within Turkey is still poor, unfortunately. And look, this series has convinced many people, of course, those who aren't familiar with history, that this sultan lived like this with his harem. There is no power nor strength except with God. But by the way, I heard the Turkish series is called The Magnificent Century, but Harim al-Sultan is the Arabic translation. You also have it. No, even if it's called The Magnificent Century, the scenes in the series are still destructive. Unfortunately, the clips that are bad are the ones that were cut out and spread everywhere, unfortunately, because the Arab channels that dubbed Harim Sultan didn't add anything beyond the original text. I don't know, but what I mean is they didn't care about broadcasting series that have the spirit of jihad, like Ertugrul and Osman. You guys, you've brought us something corrupting. Yes, we'll share it with you, but something good, not just, well, it's good that YouTube exists. You know, you can go to it anyway. Laughter. May God reward you, Professor Muhammad. Welcome. The episode has ended. We're still with the Ottomans. God willing. Thank you very much. And you, my brothers, wherever you are, don't forget to share these episodes with all your friends and brothers so that goodness may spread to everyone. Until we meet in the next episode, may God protect you. Goodbye. To watch more programs about Islamic history and to learn about its events, victories, defeats, Leaders, scholars, events, secrets, governance, politics, wars, and battles. All you have to do is follow our history channel